At the will reading, my family handed everything to my brother. I wasn't given an envelope. I wasn't given an explanation. My mother looked at me and said, "This is final." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. Because when people think you've lost, they stop watching carefully. And that's when the lawyer closed the folder and said my name. The first thing I noticed was how calm everyone looked. Not relieved, not emotional, prepared. We were seated around a polished glass table in a private conference room downtown, the kind of place where nothing personal ever happened until it did. The city skyline stretched behind the windows, bright and indifferent, as if it had no idea what was about to be decided inside. My older brother sat 2 seats to my left, scrolling through his phone like he was waiting for a coffee order, not the reading of a will. My mother sat at the head of the table, hands folded, posture perfect. My father didn't look at anyone at all. And me? I was seated at the far end, close enough to hear everything, far enough to feel optional. The lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted the folder in front of him. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "We'll begin with the primary distributions." My mother nodded once sharply, like she'd already heard the ending. He started with my brother. A property transfer. Then another. Then liquid assets. Numbers so large they didn't sound real anymore. My brother let out a soft laugh. Not joy, not surprise. Relief. The kind people feel when something they expected finally arrives. Then the lawyer paused. He flipped a page. "And as for Miss Clara West," he said, glancing in my direction. My mother spoke before he could finish. "There's no need to complicate this," she said calmly. "She won't be receiving anything. No hesitation, no explanation, just a statement." The room went quiet. Not shocked quiet. Confirmed quiet. I waited for the lawyer to correct her, to say there had been a mistake. He didn't. Instead, he looked at me, just briefly, and said, "That is correct. No envelope, no letter, not even a symbolic amount. Nothing." My mother finally turned toward me, her expression unreadable. "Your grandmother made her priorities clear years ago," she said. "You chose a different path. This is the result." Her voice wasn't cruel. That's what made it worse. It was administrative, like canceling a subscription. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't even blink, because when you grow up being quietly excluded, you learn something early. Silence makes people careless. My brother leaned back in his chair, already relaxed. My father kept his eyes fixed on the table, as if the grain of the wood suddenly required his full attention. And then, the lawyer closed the folder. Not gently, deliberately. "There is," he said slowly, "one additional item." My mother stiffened. "I was instructed," he continued, "to read it only if all immediate family members were present and only if Clara was in the room." That was the first time my mother looked unsure, not angry, not defensive, unprepared. She straightened in her chair. "That won't be necessary." "I'm afraid it is," the lawyer replied. My brother laughed under his breath. "Is this some kind of formality?" The lawyer didn't answer him. He reached into his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. Thick, cream-colored, hand-labeled. I recognized the handwriting instantly, my grandmother's. The room felt smaller suddenly. My mother stood up. "There is no second document," she said sharply. "If there were, I would know." The lawyer met her gaze. "This document," he said, "was sealed under independent legal supervision. You were never meant to see it, unless these conditions were met." He turned slightly and placed the envelope on the table. In front of me. For the first time since I'd walked into that room, no one spoke, because something had shifted, and whatever my family thought this meeting was about, it clearly wasn't over. What no one in that room realized yet was that the envelope wasn't an explanation, it was a correction. No one reached for the envelope. My mother remained standing, her hands pressed flat against the table as if she could physically stop what was about to happen. My brother's expression shifted. Not fear yet, just irritation. Like something was interrupting a schedule he thought was fixed. "This is unnecessary," my mother said. "We've already settled everything that matters." The lawyer didn't respond right away. He picked up the envelope slowly, making sure everyone could see the seal, the date, the familiar handwriting. He didn't rush. People who deal in facts rarely do. "This document," he said, "was prepared less than 9 months before your mother's passing. It was reviewed by independent counsel and signed with full medical clearance." My brother frowned. That doesn't make sense. She barely discussed finances near the end. I felt a tightening in my chest. She discussed them with me. Just not where they could hear. The lawyer broke the seal. The sound was soft, barely audible, but it landed heavily, like something final. To my granddaughter Clara West, he read, I leave full controlling interest in Horizon Vale Holdings, including all subsidiaries, accounts, and assets held solely in my name. My brother sat forward abruptly. What is that? The lawyer looked up. A privately held investment firm your grandmother built quietly over the last decade. My father finally spoke. That's impossible. She didn't have the time, he added, as if time had ever stopped her from doing anything she wanted. She made time, the lawyer replied, and she made sure it remained separate from family-managed accounts. The words kept coming. Logistics infrastructure, regional distribution contracts, commercial real estate partnerships. The valuation exceeded what had just been distributed. The room fell silent again. 30 million suddenly sounded small. My mother laughed once, sharp and hollow. You expect us to believe she left more to Clara than to her own children? The lawyer met her eyes evenly. Ownership isn't a belief, it's a fact. My mother stepped back, as if the floor had shifted beneath her. She was manipulated, she said, louder now. Clara turned her against us. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The lawyer lowered his gaze to the page again. She anticipated that accusation, he said, which is why she explained her reasoning in detail. He took a breath. I am aware, he read, that Clara has been kept at a distance from me. Visits cancelled, messages filtered, information withheld. My mother's composure cracked. That's a lie, she snapped. I protected her. The lawyer continued, unmoved. I have also discovered transfers from joint accounts made without my direct consent. When I asked about them, I was told I had already approved them. My brother stood abruptly. This is insane. You're tearing this family apart. For the first time, I lifted my head. No, I said quietly. You did that long before today. The lawyer folded the document carefully. There is more, he said. My mother's voice dropped into something raw. What more? He reached into his briefcase again and placed a small black drive on the table. A recorded statement, he said, in her own words. The air changed. This time, no one laughed. The document had shifted control. The recording was about to destroy the story they'd lived on for years. No one tried to stop the lawyer. Not when he slid the small black drive across the table. Not when he nodded toward the assistant seated quietly near the wall. Not even when my mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Moments earlier, she'd been in control. Now she looked calculated. You're not playing that, she said finally, her voice thin. You can't ambush us with some recording. The lawyer didn't argue. Your mother requested this be presented, he said calmly, if her decisions were questioned. My father shifted in his seat. She had good days and bad days, he muttered. Everyone knows that. Again, no argument. Just procedure. A laptop was opened. The drive was inserted. The screen flickered once before settling. And then, there she was. Older than I remembered. Thinner. But upright. Alert. Her eyes were steady in a way they hadn't been for years. She wore a pressed blouse, her hair neatly brushed, like she was attending a meeting. Not recording her final words. My name is Evelyn West, she said evenly, and I am here to explain why I changed my will. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. I am not confused, Evelyn continued. I am not being pressured. I know exactly what I am doing. My brother shook his head slowly. This is unbelievable. On the screen, my grandmother leaned forward slightly. I have watched money leave my accounts without my approval, she said. When I asked about it, I was told I had already agreed. I had not. The color drained from my brother's face. I have also watched my relationship with Clara be managed for me, Evelyn continued. Calls redirected, messages unanswered, visits canceled, always for my own good. My chest tightened. The ignored texts, the holidays I was told not to attend, the silence that never made sense until now. My mother slammed her hand on the table. Turn this off, she shouted. She was upset. She didn't understand what she was saying. The lawyer didn't move. On the screen, Evelyn's voice hardened. I understand more than they think, she said, and I understand who listens. She paused, then softened. Clara listens. She asks questions. She builds instead of taking. She never once treated me like an inconvenience. I felt my eyes burn, but I didn't look away. That is why Horizon Vale Holdings belongs to her, Evelyn said. Every share, every account. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the laptop. My mother's composure collapsed. This isn't fair, she cried. After everything we did for her. Evelyn looked directly into the camera. If you are watching this, she said, it means you are trying to take what does not belong to you. The video ended. The screen went dark. But the silence didn't lift. It pressed down on the room, heavy, final. For the first time in my life, the truth didn't whisper. It stood. They thought the recording was the worst of it. They were wrong. No one spoke after the screen went dark. My mother was breathing fast now. Short, shallow breaths, like she was trying to outrun something that had already caught her. My father stared at the blank laptop, tapping his fingers against the table in a rhythm that no longer made sense. This doesn't prove anything, he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. People say things when they're emotional. The lawyer closed the laptop gently, as if giving my grandmother the dignity of a proper goodbye. The recording is dated, time-stamped, and accompanied by a medical evaluation confirming full capacity, he said. But that isn't all. My mother snapped her head up. Of course it isn't, she said bitterly. You won't stop at humiliating us. This isn't about humiliation, the lawyer replied. It's about documentation. He slid a thin stack of papers across the table. Bank statements. Transfer logs. Authorization records. I petitioned the court for a preliminary forensic review after your mother raised concerns, he continued. These records show repeated transfers made under power of attorney for expenses unrelated to her care. My brother leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. That money paid for family things. Luxury travel, the lawyer said calmly. Vehicle leases. Personal branding expenses, my mother's voice rose. We sacrificed for her. And the court will consider that, the lawyer said evenly. But it will also consider timing, frequency, and consent. He turned toward me for the first time since the video ended. Clara, he said, your grandmother anticipated a challenge. My heart thudded. What happens now? His answer was measured and devastating. The court will recognize your controlling interest in Horizon Vale Holdings. If the will is contested, these records become public. My brother's grip tightened. Public? Yes, the lawyer replied, including the transfers, the recording, and the medical evaluations. My mother sank back into her chair. For the first time, she wasn't arguing. She wasn't commanding. She was calculating. And I realized then that this was no longer about love or betrayal. It was about evidence. And evidence doesn't care who raised you. They didn't fight the will that day. But what happened after the paperwork left the room was far worse. They didn't contest the will. Not that day. Not publicly. The lawyer filed the sealed document the following week, along with the recording, the medical clearance, and the preliminary financial review. Once the paperwork moved out of that conference room and into the court system, the confidence my family had lived on for decades began to evaporate. What followed wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no late-night phone calls, no apologies disguised as concern, just processes. A forensic accountant was appointed to complete the audit my grandmother had requested before she died. Line by line. Year by year. The story my parents had controlled so carefully was translated into numbers that didn't lie. Expenses justified as family needs. Transfers labeled temporary. Authorizations claimed, but never documented. The truth didn't explode. It accumulated. My brother's online presence changed first. The trips stopped appearing. The brand partnerships grew quiet, then distant, then unreachable. His carefully constructed lifestyle didn't collapse in a single moment. It simply stopped being funded. My parents sold the house within 3 months. The one with the manicured lawn and the staged holiday photos on the front steps. The one my mother liked to call our legacy. They downsized quietly. Far from the city. Far from questions. They didn't call me. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Not even to argue. And for the first time, their silence wasn't something done to me. It was something I chose to accept. I signed the final documents alone. No family witnesses. Just the lawyer, a clerk, and the steady weight of a pen in my hand. When I finished, he nodded once. They have no legal claim to your assets, he said. Not now. Not ever. Something loosened in my chest, not relief. Clarity. I thought the story ended with ownership. I was wrong. I moved 3 months later. Not to disappear, not to start over from nothing, to start forward. The city I chose wasn't dramatic. It didn't promise reinvention. It offered space. Distance. The kind of quiet where decisions could be made without permission. Horizon Vale Holdings already had a small office there. A handful of people who had been doing real work long before my family ever knew the company existed. The first week, no one treated me like an inheritance. They treated me like a responsibility. There were spreadsheets to review, contracts to understand, partners who wanted to know whether I was serious or just another name attached to a document. I welcomed that. For the first time in my life, my value wasn't measured by how well I fit a family image, but by whether I paid attention, asked the right questions, and followed through. And I did. We didn't chase attention. We focused on stability. Helping mid-size logistics companies modernize systems, supporting regional distributors navigating markets that didn't forgive mistakes. I remembered my grandmother's voice every time we made a decision. Build something useful, something that lasts. I set up a small scholarship fund in her name, quietly. No announcements, no press releases. Just opportunities for students who reminded me a little too much of myself, curious, overlooked, and underestimated. My brother emailed me once during that first year, no accusations, no demands. Just a few paragraphs admitting he didn't know who he was without the attention, without the money smoothing everything over. I didn't reply right away. When I finally did, I kept it simple. Kind. Firm. We weren't enemies, but we weren't close either. Not yet. I thought distance would be the hardest part. I was wrong. For a long time, I thought the hardest part of my life was being ignored. Growing up as the daughter who didn't fit the picture, the one who didn't reflect the image my parents wanted to present. I believed that if I worked harder, stayed quieter, or proved myself more clearly, they would eventually see me. I was wrong. Some people don't overlook you because you lack value. They overlook you because acknowledging your value would threaten the story they've built about themselves. What my grandmother gave me wasn't just a company or financial security. She gave me perspective. She showed me that being quiet doesn't mean being powerless. That patience can be a form of strength when it's paired with preparation. I learned that family isn't defined by who controls the table when decisions are made. It's defined by who protects your future when you're not in the room. I also learned something harder. You don't have to stay in spaces where your worth is constantly debated. You're allowed to leave. You're allowed to build something new with people who don't need to be convinced you matter. If you've ever been the person who is dismissed, underestimated, or quietly written out, remember this. Your value doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to acknowledge it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to speak louder. It's to step forward, calm, prepared, and unafraid, when the truth finally has room to stand.